Hello, and welcome to Biology Video 2.02, Introduction to Macromolecules. What we're going to be talking about in today's video are the four categories of macromolecules and some of the general characteristics of each of those categories. Before we can talk about the categories, though, we need to get some background terms. You have some space at the top of your paper that's not being used, and I don't want to reposition mine, so I'm just going to lay an extra little square down here. Remember, you're going to write at the top of your paper. Because before we can talk about macromolecules, there's two terms we have to understand. One is monomer and one is polymer. And you kind of already know what these are, you just didn't know it. If you've ever played with blocks or you've played with Legos, you have played with monomers and polymers. A monomer is a small molecule, in our case, and a polymer is, and these are just very basic definitions, a polymer are lots of small molecules hooked together. So an example would be Legos. With Legos, a monomer would be a brick. That's in a Lego. Or, you know, we have the slanty pieces that you can use for roofs, or you could do a slanted piece. What else do you guys have with Legos? The flat pieces you can use for bases. And usually when we're doing this in classroom, I actually get the Legos out and we play with them. So the polymer is what you build from the monomers. So maybe your favorite thing to build out of Legos is a Lego house. Or maybe you like to build Lego cars. So again, the monomer are the individual pieces. The polymer is what you build because you literally snap them together. So what we're going to see is that our macromolecules are polymers, but they're made from monomers. And so we want to cover, for each of the categories of macromolecules, we want to talk about the monomers. All right, I'm going to set that aside. And let's put, and we're going to color code. Let's do carbohydrates here. So we're now writing out the names of the four categories of macromolecules. The first one is carbs, and I have a picture of a carbohydrate structure here. Over here I have lipids, and I have a lipid structure here. Let's do proteins in purple. And let's do nucleic acids. In green. So when we talk about macromolecules, we have four categories: carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. Some of these should sound really familiar to you because unless you've been asleep for the past 5 years, you've heard the word carbohydrate. Everybody and their brother are on low carb diets, and I'm using air quotes here. So what's the deal with carbohydrates? Excuse me. Lipids are the word for fats, basically. And you know what it's like to eat something that's fatty. If you have a piece of pepperoni pizza, there's little pools of grease in it. That's a high lipid food. Proteins, that's going to be meats. Nucleic acids are something that you may or may not have remembered from a previous science class. But this structure down here should look familiar. You guys recognize that? That's DNA. So nucleic acids are DNA. Well, for each of these categories, we want to write down the source. We want to write down the function. I'm going to write that. And we want to write down the common monomers. And if we have other information, we'll write it below. So let's do function, source, monomers. What you see here is a polymer. So what is that polymer made of? What you see here is a polymer. This is lots of lipids hooked together. Function, source, and monomers. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and after I ask my question, pause the video and see if you can answer this question. Where in your diet do you get carbohydrates? Where in your diet do you get proteins? Where in your diet do you get lipids? So go ahead, hit pause. All right, welcome back. How many of those could you answer? Well, hopefully you realized that carbohydrates in your diet come from starches, like breads, pasta, potatoes. What do these things have in common? Guys, where does bread come from? You'll probably say flour. Where does the flour come from? Wheat. Where does pasta come from? Pasta comes from wheat. Potatoes are a plant. So the most common source for us for carbs and starches are plant-based. These are all going to be plant-based. Here's another interesting thing. Now, we don't eat this, but another plant-based carb is wood. So you don't eat wood, but if you were camping it all the summer, you probably had a stack of wood next to your fire ring because you used it to have a campfire. Well, our bodies do the same thing. The main function for carbohydrates is fuel. Carbs provide the fuel for our bodies. And if you have a wood burning stove at home, you burn wood in that provides your fuel. But you also have wood in the structure of your home. Wood makes up the walls of your home, and our bodies do the same thing. So when we say structure, we're talking about building things. Okay, so what are the common monomers? There's actually about 5 monomers for carbs, but we're really only going to talk about one. The one monomer that we talk about is glucose, and this is about as common as ATP. The molecular formula for glucose is C6H12O6. And we're going to come back to that again and again and again and again. Other ones are fructose, which is in fruits, galactose, which is in milks, but in our biology class, we're really only going to talk about glucose. All right, let's move on to lipids. Where do you get lipids from? And remember, lipids are the same thing as fats. Well, if you've ever eaten dairy, there's a lot of fats in dairy. Sometimes if we have, well, we're going to skip that one. What about oils? Like canola oil, sunflower oil, how about butter? That's a fat, right? Well, it turns out that lipids kind of do the same thing for us that carbs do. If you have extra lipids, you store it as cellulose or adipose. And what is the reason we have fat in our bodies? Well, it helps us to stay warm, but it provides long-term storage fuel. Long-term storage for energy, because if we run out of carbs, then we can burn fat. And just like carbs, we also build some stuff out of lipids. So we have some of our structures come from lipids. And an example of that is above. So this is the most common structure that we build from lipids. The most common monomer is called a phospholipid. There are, again, other monomers of lipids, but the most common is a phospholipid. So if you could zoom in on this picture and you took this one corner piece down here, it would look like this. This is a phospholipid. So this is a phosphate group. That's a lipid chain, and that's a lipid chain. And if you could go through, you could count how many of these are in this structure. So here we have a monomer that's one piece, and if I put about 80 of these together, I'm going to make this structure. Over here, when we look at glucose, that little piece right there was one glucose. And if I hook about 100 of those together, I get this big branching chain. So monomer, or there's the monomer, there's the polymer. There's my monomer, there's my polymer. All right, proteins, where do we get them from? Meat. So most of the proteins that we eat, not all, there are some plant-based proteins like soy, but most of our proteins come from meat, eggs, and these are animal-based. And proteins, their function, it's so many things here. We have communication, transportation, also some structure. Think about your home as a building. Think about if lipids and carbs are structure, that would be like the walls and the drywall of your house. Now I want you to think about everything else that's in your house, from the furniture to the carpet to the wiring to the appliances. If a cell was like a house, all of that stuff I just listed would be proteins. Proteins do everything. And here's the reason why proteins are so diverse. This guy has about 4 or 5 monomers. This guy has about 4 or 5 monomers, but proteins have 20. And as a group, they're called amino acids. And if it makes sense if you think about it. If you have an alphabet that has 3 letters in it, how many words can you make? Not very many. If you have an alphabet that has 20 letters in it, and remember letters are like monomers, we can put them together. Can we make lots of different words? Yeah, think about an encyclopedia. I mean, it has, an encyclopedia is that thick and it's full of words because we have 24 or 26 letters in the alphabet. So these amino acid monomers let us make this incredibly diverse group that does everything else. All right, last but not least, let's talk about nucleic acids. So we have function,